One of the strange things about Henry is that we don't really know what he dies of. It's very hard to medically diagnose people from 4th centuries.
King Henry VIII is remembered as a monster, a bloated tyrant who discarded wives and tore his country apart. But for centuries, we've missed the real story. Scientists now believe a hidden secret lurking in his very veins was the real culprit.
He had increasingly a problem with his legs. And he also suffered really badly from constipation.
This wasn't just bad luck or a bad temper. It was a biological flaw. A blood mystery hidden for 500 years has finally been solved, and the truth reveals the king wasn't just a villain. He was a victim of his own DNA, and this secret explains everything: the rage, the paranoia, and the desperate quest for a son. From hero to horror. When Henry VIII took the throne in 1509, he was just 17 years old, and he wasn't just a king, he was a superstar. What most people don't realize is how impressive he was. This wasn't the huge, angry man from the portraits. The young Henry stood over 6 feet tall, a giant in an age when most men were lucky to be 5 feet 5. He had golden red hair, a powerful athletic build, and a charm that made ambassadors swoon. He was a true Renaissance man. He could outjoust the best knights in Europe, hunt for 10 hours straight without breaking a sweat, and then go compose music, write poetry, and debate religion in fluent Latin and French. He was brilliant, he was handsome, and his people adored him. An ambassador at the time wrote that he was the handsomest potentate I ever set eyes on, and that His Majesty is a most accomplished prince. He was, by all accounts, the perfect king. In 1509, he married the person everyone thought was his perfect match, Catherine of Aragon. She was a Spanish princess, beautiful, smart, and deeply religious. Their plan was simple: build a dynasty. They would have strong sons to secure the Tudor line forever. At least that was the plan. But here's the catch: something started to go wrong almost right away. Catherine became pregnant, and the whole kingdom celebrated. But in 1510, the baby, a daughter, was born still. A devastating loss, but they were young. They would try again, and they did. In 1511, on New Year's Day, Catherine gave birth to a son, Henry, the Prince of Wales. The kingdom went wild. Bells rang, cannons fired, and King Henry held massive parties. His dream was complete. He had his heir. Except he didn't. The baby, this perfect prince, passed away after just 52 days. The grief was crushing. But for Henry, it was more than grief. It was a failure. A king needed a son. It was his main job. So they tried again and again and again, and this is where the mystery truly begins. The nightmare started. Catherine had another miscarriage in 1513. Then in 1514, another son was born and passed away within hours. It was a pattern of unbelievable heartbreak. Finally, in 1516, a child was born and survived. A healthy, tough little girl named Mary. Henry loved his daughter, but the kingdom was terrified. A queen? England had never been ruled by a queen alone. It was seen as a recipe for civil war. The pressure was on. He needed a boy. But the tragedies just kept coming. In 1517, another stillbirth. In 1518, another daughter born weak, who perished after just a few days. After nearly 20 years of marriage, all Henry had to show for it was one living daughter. He was desperate. He became obsessed with the idea that he was being punished by God. He convinced himself his marriage to Catherine, who had been his older brother's widow, was a sin. The problem, he decided, had to be Catherine. So here's the deal. He fell for a new woman, the young and fiery Anne Boleyn. He truly believed she would be the one to give him the son he craved. He tore his country apart to be with her. When the Pope refused to annul his marriage, Henry just broke away from the Catholic Church entirely. He declared himself the head of the new Church of England, divorced Catherine, and married a pregnant Anne in 1533. He was sure this was the answer. He was sure the baby she was carrying was the prince he had been promised. But in September 1533, Anne gave birth to another girl. Elizabeth. Henry was disappointed, but he was still hopeful. Anne was young. They would try again. But the same horrifying pattern started. Anne had a miscarriage in 1534. then another. The pressure was mounting. Henry's charm was fading, replaced by a dark, anxious temper. He was starting to believe he was cursed. And then came the day that changed everything. The day that split his life in two. January 24th, 1536. It was a day that started with celebration and ended in a catastrophe that would unleash the monster inside the king. What happened that day was more than just an accident. The accident that broke the king. On that cold January day in 1536, King Henry was 44 years old. He was heavier now, not the slim athlete he used to be, but he was still desperate to prove he had it. He decided to compete in a jousting tournament at Greenwich Palace. What most people don't realize is that jousting wasn't the fancy, polite sport we see in movies. It was brutal. It was the Formula One of its day. Let's paint the picture. You have two men covered in almost 100 pounds of solid steel armor. They are riding massive, powerful war horses, also in armor. They charge at each other on a wooden track holding a solid 11-foot wooden lance. Their combined speed could be over 40 miles per hour. The goal was to shatter your lance on the other guy's shield, or even better, knock him clean off his horse. It was incredibly dangerous. Henry loved it. But on this day, his luck ran out. He charged down the tilt yard, lowered his lance, and then disaster. His horse, also in full armor, stumbled and fell. The king, trapped in his heavy steel suit, crashed to the ground, and then the armored horse, weighing over 1,000 pounds, fell on top of him. The court was horrified. Music stopped. People screamed. They rushed to him, but he didn't move. He lay unconscious, motionless. For 2 hours, courtiers whispered that the king was gone. England was about to be thrown into chaos. He did eventually wake up. It seemed like a miracle, but the man who woke up was not the same man who had fallen. This accident was the dividing line of his life. For centuries, this has been the #1 theory for Henry's change, a traumatic brain injury, or TBI. It makes perfect sense. A massive blow to the head, especially from a 1,000-pound horse, could easily damage the frontal lobes of the brain. This is the part of your brain that controls personality, impulse control, and judgment. A person with frontal lobe damage can seem fine 1 minute. They can still talk, walk, and remember who they are, but their personality is gone. They become impulsive, quick to anger, paranoid, and emotionally unstable. Sound familiar? In the months that followed, his entire personality changed. His temper, once fiery but controllable, became explosive. He would fly into sudden, violent rages over nothing. His judgment, once sharp, became clouded by suspicion. And his body? It was breaking down. The accident had shattered his leg. From that day on, it never healed. Painful, oozing wounds called ulcers opened up on his legs. They were constantly infected, and the smell, amazingly bad. Servants would later say they could smell the king coming long before they could see him. This agony was constant. It never ever stopped for the rest of his life. And get this, the king who once hunted all day could now barely walk. He was trapped in his own body in constant, agonizing pain. And here's a wild theory some have whispered about. Was it an accident at all? Henry was making a lot of enemies. He had destroyed the church, seized all its money, and was ending anyone who opposed him. Queen Anne Boleyn herself was terrified as she had failed to produce a son. Did someone, perhaps from her faction or a rival one, tamper with the king's saddle? A loose strap, a spooked horse, it's all it would have taken. There's no proof, but in the paranoid world of the Tudor court, everyone was a suspect. The crazy part is the immediate fallout. 11 days after the accident, Queen Anne Boleyn, who was pregnant with the son Henry knew would save the dynasty, suddenly miscarried. The child, she said, was a boy. When Henry found out, he stormed into her room, not with sympathy, but with rage. He blamed her. He screamed that he had been seduced into the marriage by witchcraft. His paranoia, fed by his constant pain and his possible brain injury, exploded. Within 4 months, Anne Boleyn was arrested. The charges were insane: adultery with 5 men, including her own brother. Treason. Witchcraft. No one believes these charges today. They were the ravings of a man looking for an excuse. In May of 1536, just 4 months after his accident, Henry had the wife he'd broken the world for ended. The TBI theory is powerful. It explains the rage, it explains the paranoia, but it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the miscarriages. It doesn't explain why his children with Catherine also perished long before his accident. And it doesn't explain the other popular and dark theory for his decline. The brain injury was bad, but was something else already rotting the king from the inside? Was Henry a medical nightmare? The jousting accident explains the king's mind. But what about his body? For centuries, another more scandalous theory has been the favorite. This is the one everyone whispers about: syphilis. It's a horrifying disease, especially back then, and on the surface, the symptoms seem to match. In its later stages, it can cause skin ulcers, bone pain, and most importantly, neurological decay. It can cause madness, paranoia, and delusions of grandeur. It also famously can be passed from a mother to her child, often resulting in stillbirths or babies who perish shortly after birth. This seems to fit, right? A king known for his many partners, a string of stillborn children, a descent into madness, ulcers on his body. It's an open and shut case. Many historians ran with this theory for decades. It painted Henry as a decadent ruler who was brought down by his own immoral behavior. But here's the catch: it's probably not true. What most people don't realize is that modern historians have serious doubts about the syphilis theory. First, the children. While syphilis does cause stillbirths, the children who do survive, like Mary and Elizabeth, almost always show signs of the disease themselves: deformed teeth, blindness, deafness. Both Mary and Elizabeth were famously unhealthy kids, but they had different problems. Mary had vision issues and Elizabeth was frail, but neither had the classic telltale signs of inherited syphilis. And his one surviving son, Edward, was bright and seemingly healthy at first. Second, the ulcers. Henry's infamous stinking ulcers were on his legs. This is not a typical sign of syphilis. Those ulcers are almost always a sign of something else. Something we'll get to. So if it wasn't syphilis and the TBI was only part of the story, what else was going on? The most obvious answer was his diet. After 1536, Henry stopped moving, but he did not stop eating. He went from being a top-tier athlete to being completely sedentary, all while eating like he was still training for the Olympics. And the Tudor diet for a king was insane. We're talking about an estimated 5,000 calories a day. And it wasn't salads, it was meat. All meat. A typical feast would have swan, peacock, venison, wild boar, rabbit, and dozens of other dishes, all cooked in butter and fat. He drank an estimated 10 pints of ale and strong wine every single day. That's over a gallon of alcohol. The crazy part is that they considered vegetables peasant food, so he almost never ate them. His diet was 100% protein, fat, and alcohol. The results were predictable. The slim, 6-foot-plus king ballooned. We have his armor. In his 20s, he had a trim 32-inch waist. By his 50s, his waist measured a staggering 52 inches. He was so large he had to be carried around in a special chair. His final weight is estimated to be close to 400 pounds. This massive, sudden weight gain leads to another powerful theory: type 2 diabetes. This would explain so much. The obesity, the leg ulcers that wouldn't heal, a classic sign of diabetes, his low energy, and even his irritability from blood sugar swings. Another, even more specific theory is Cushing's syndrome. This is a hormonal disorder where the body produces way too much cortisol, the stress hormone. It can be triggered by a major physical trauma, like say a jousting accident. The symptoms? Rapid weight gain, especially in the torso and face, giving a moon face appearance, which Henry had, muscle weakness. And critically, high blood pressure and psychological issues, including paranoia and depression. These theories are all fantastic. They all explain a piece of the puzzle. The TBI explains the new personality. Diabetes and Cushing's explain the 400-pound body, and the ulcer syphilis, though unlikely, would explain the miscarriages. But what if there was one theory? One single hidden time bomb in his genes that could explain all of it? The miscarriages, the madness, the muscle weakness, everything. This is the theory that scientists have finally uncovered, and it all comes down to his blood. Why the wives weren't to blame. For 500 years, the world blamed the wives. Catherine of Aragon was cursed. Anne Boleyn was a witch. Jane Seymour was lucky because she delivered a son and then passed away before Henry could turn on her. But in 2011, a bioarchaeologist named Katrina Banks Whitley and an anthropologist named Kyra Kramer proposed a new theory, a theory that changes everything. They claimed the problem was never the wives. The problem was Henry's blood. So here's the deal. They proposed that King Henry VIII had a rare blood type. It's called Kell positive. Most people, about 91% of us, are Kell negative. We don't even have this thing. But Henry, they believe, was part of the rare 9% who did, and for a man desperate to have children, this was basically a genetic time bomb. Here's how it works, in simple terms. Let's say a father is Kell positive, like Henry. He marries a woman who is Kell negative, which Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn almost certainly were. They have a baby. There's a 50-50 chance that baby will inherit the father's Kell positive gene. Now, the first pregnancy usually goes just fine. The Kell positive baby is healthy. The mother is healthy. Everyone is happy. But here's the catch. During the birth, a little bit of the baby's Kell positive blood gets into the mother's system. Her body, which is Kell negative, sees this new blood type as an invader. It freaks out. It says this is a threat. So her immune system does what it's designed to do. It creates soldiers called antibodies specifically to find and destroy any Kell positive blood it ever sees again. The first baby is safe because by the time her body makes these soldiers, the baby is already born. But now the mother is sensitized. She is primed for attack. Then she gets pregnant a second time with another Kell positive baby. This time her body is ready. The soldiers she built after the first birth cross the placenta and attack the developing fetus. They destroy its red blood cells. The baby becomes anemic. Its tiny body swells with fluid. Its organs fail. And then it perishes. This usually happens in the second or third trimester. It results in a late-term miscarriage or a stillbirth. Does this sound familiar? It should. It is the exact pattern of Henry's life. Let's look at the evidence. First, Catherine of Aragon. She had at least 6, maybe 8 pregnancies. Her first baby was a stillborn daughter. This could have been the sensitizing event. Her second was the little prince who passed at 52 days. Then, miscarriage after miscarriage, stillbirth after stillbirth, all late in the pregnancies. But what about Princess Mary? She was the 5th pregnancy and she survived. How does that fit? It's the other side of the 50-50 coin. Mary must have inherited the Kell negative gene. The mother's soldiers saw her blood, recognized it as safe, like her own, and left it alone. Mary's survival isn't the exception to the rule, it's the very thing that proves the rule. Now look at Anne Boleyn. The evidence is even cleaner. Her first pregnancy with Henry, it resulted in Princess Elizabeth, a perfectly healthy baby girl, no complications. This fits the Kell model perfectly. First baby is safe. But this sensitized Anne's body. Her second pregnancy in 1534 ended in a miscarriage. Her third pregnancy, the one she lost right after Henry's jousting accident, was a male fetus that perished late in the pregnancy. The pattern is identical. A healthy firstborn followed by a string of tragic losses. The crazy part is that this happened across 2 different unrelated women. The only common link was Henry. He was the one carrying the genetic flaw. He was the one passing it on. For centuries, he tortured himself believing God was punishing him. He tore his kingdom apart, ended 2 marriages, and sent men to their doom, all because he thought his wives were broken. But it was him. It was always him. His own blood was the enemy of his children. This discovery is staggering. It reframes everything we thought we knew about him. But here's the kicker. This Kell positive gene, it doesn't just explain the lost children, it's linked to another even more terrifying disorder. A disorder that doesn't just attack the body, it attacks the mind. It's called McLeod syndrome. It is an extremely rare genetic disorder, and here's the part that will make the hair on your arm stand up. It is linked to the Kell blood system. It's often found in men who are Kell positive. It's carried on the X chromosome, meaning it almost exclusively affects men. And most importantly, the symptoms usually start to appear when a man is around 40 years old. Henry VIII was 44 when he had his jousting accident. The timing is perfect. It's believed the massive physical shock of that accident is what switched on this dormant genetic disease, starting his rapid decline and the symptoms of McLeod syndrome. They are a perfect, terrifying checklist of Henry's final years. First, the physical symptoms. The disorder causes progressive muscle weakness. This explains why Henry, the great athlete, suddenly couldn't even walk. It explains his reliance on chairs and helpers. It also causes heart problems, like an enlarged heart and irregular heartbeats. We know from his final days that he suffered from what sounds exactly like congestive heart failure. But the physical part isn't even the scariest. The worst symptoms are neurological. McLeod syndrome attacks the brain. It causes severe personality changes. It leads to extreme paranoia, deep depression, and explosive, uncontrollable rages. It causes cognitive decline, confusion, and memory loss. It literally eats away at the parts of the brain that control judgment and reason. Suddenly, Henry's reign of terror makes a new horrifying kind of sense. Think about it. This is the man who had his wife, Anne Boleyn, ended on charges of relations with 5 men. At the same time, the charges were physically impossible, totally irrational, but to a brain being eaten by paranoia, it made perfect sense. Think about Thomas Cromwell. This was Henry's most loyal servant, his right-hand man for a decade. The man who made the break with Rome happen. Henry loved him. Then in 1540, Henry just turned on him. He had him arrested and ended calling him a traitor. It was a shocking, senseless act. But it's a classic example of paranoid delusion, a key symptom of McLeod syndrome. This one, single genetic flaw, explains everything. The Kell positive gene explains the lost children, and the McLeod syndrome linked to it explains the paranoia, the rage, the muscle weakness, and the heart failure. It paints a picture of a man trapped in a living nightmare. His legs were on fire with constant burning pain. His heart was failing, and his brain was lying to him. It was telling him that everyone was a traitor, that his friends were enemies, that his wives were betraying him. The Golden Prince was gone. In his place was a terrified, enraged, and confused man being destroyed from the inside out by a single, microscopic flaw in his genes. But a flaw like that had to come from somewhere. A legacy, written in bad blood. A genetic time bomb like this doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's inherited, it's passed down from one generation to the next. So where did Henry get this double-edged sword of Kell-positive blood and McLeod syndrome? The researchers traced it back, up his family tree, past his mother, Elizabeth of York, to his maternal great-grandmother. Her name was Jacquetta of Luxembourg. And here's the crazy part. Jacquetta was a fascinating woman, a duchess from a powerful family. But in her own time, she was widely rumored to be a witch. That's right. Her political enemies accused her of using dark magic to help her daughter, Elizabeth Woodville, seduce King Edward IV. It was a huge scandal during the Wars of the Roses. Now, was she really a witch? Almost certainly not. But the irony is staggering. Her enemies accused her of placing a curse on the royal family, and in a way, they were right. She didn't pass on a magical curse. She passed on a genetic one. The researchers traced the Kell-positive trait and its related miscarriages through her family line. The men in her family tree showed a similar, though less documented, pattern of reproductive trouble. It was a hidden flaw, a microscopic secret that finally exploded with full, terrifying force in her great-grandson, King Henry VIII. The man who was so desperate for a son, he was genetically incapable of having a healthy one. The end of Henry's life was a grim reflection of this internal war. By his final days in January 1547, he was 55 years old and his body was a wreck. He was nearly 400 pounds, unable to walk, and had to be winched onto his horse like cargo. The leg ulcers were so foul that his doctors could barely stand to be in the same room. His mind was just as bad. He was consumed by paranoia, trusting no one. His final act of tyranny was signing the order to end the Duke of Norfolk, one of his oldest allies. The man was saved only because Henry himself perished the night before the scheduled event. On January 28, 1547, the king finally gave in. His body, ravaged by his genes, his diet, and his own paranoia, simply stopped. He passed away in the early hours of the morning, a tormented, broken man. So here's the deal. When we think of King Henry VIII, what do we see? We see that famous portrait, right? A bloated, furious man, dripping in jewels, staring you down. We think of the rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died. He's a caricature of a tyrant, a one-dimensional monster who tore his country apart on a whim. But what if that's only half the story? The science, the biology suggests a much darker and far more tragic narrative, because the Henry of his youth was a different man entirely. This wasn't a small shift. This was a complete 180. The young Henry was the golden prince of Europe. He was a brilliant scholar, a gifted musician, a world-class athlete. He was handsome, charismatic, and a popular king. So what happened? How did that vibrant hero decay into the 400-pound paranoid invalid, a man so volatile he would order the execution of his closest friends and wives? Are we missing a key detail? Is this all just speculation? For centuries, historians blamed jousting accidents or syphilis. But none of those theories truly hold up. The thing is, the Kell and MacLeod theory is the only one that fits all the facts. It starts with his blood type. If Henry was Kell positive, a rare blood group, it would perfectly explain the tragic obstetric history of his wives. A Kell positive father and a Kell negative mother often have one healthy first child. But after that, the mother's body develops antibodies that attack subsequent Kell positive fetuses. This leads to a devastating pattern of miscarriages and stillbirths. Exactly what we see with Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. But it gets deeper. This same Kell antigen is linked to a rare genetic disorder called MacLeod syndrome. And this is the key. MacLeod syndrome often doesn't show up until midlife. Its symptoms: muscle weakness, cognitive decline, psychosis, and severe paranoia. It connects the two halves of his life, the Golden Prince and the bloated tyrant, with a single devastating biological thread. This wasn't a man who woke up one day and chose to be evil. This was a man who was, in a very real way, a prisoner of his own blood. It doesn't excuse his actions. It doesn't bring back the people he had ended or undo the damage he did to his country. But it does explain him. It gives us an answer to the 500-year-old mystery of how a hero became a horror story. The truth wasn't a curse from God, it was a secret hidden for centuries right in his DNA. So, what do you think? Does this new science change how we see him? Was Henry VIII a true tyrant, or was he just a victim of his own biology? Let me know your thoughts down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.